like to say that I'm really honored to be here presenting today. As I was reading the material I was given when I signed in today, I looked at the message from Montgomery History. And the first sentence says, Montgomery History has been serving the local community since its founding in 1944. Its mission is to collect, preserve, interpret, and share the histories of all of Montgomery County's citizens. And so I'm really pleased that I'm able to talk about the Latino community within that mission. So I'd like to thank Matt Logan and Heather Boslog as well, and Montgomery College for putting all of this together, and also for inviting me here. I feel very much at home here. My office is just over in the other building. This is my campus. I don't know if this is the first talk on Latinos in the community. I know that there was a panel last year about it, so I don't want to say that I'm the first, but I'm honored to be one of the earlier presenters on the Latino community. And I know that archaeology is a part of this history conference, but I don't know if I'm one of the first anthropologists as well, so this is very exciting. So I'd like to start off with a few numbers before beginning. In 1960, the US Census recorded in Montgomery County 948 people who spoke Spanish as their first language. 948. And it was recorded as mother tongue. And I'm going to talk about the census a little bit, but I just want you to start thinking about these numbers. So 948 Spanish speakers. About half of them were from Mexico. And the others, we don't know. It wasn't recorded. Today in Montgomery County, there are more than 165,000 Latino residents, and that's about 17% of the population. The number is surely higher than that. Not everybody is recorded in the census. And the largest group today is from El Salvador. So as I address the history of the Latino community in Montgomery County, I want to make 2 points. And one is that the Latino community in the Washington, D.C. area is more diverse and deeper than most people realize. And so this, as Council Member Nancy Navarro said, makes the community unique in the nation. And so this area, the Washington metropolitan area, of course, includes Montgomery County. Second, although I want to say that although a sense of belonging is linked to history and particular physical places, it is also constructed in temporary and often fluid ways that elude being marked by permanent structures and archaeological footprints, so often used to make connections to the past. Some of the temporary ways that people create sense of belonging is through social and family gatherings, religious rites, fiestas, festivals, and of course, sport. So I'll talk a little bit about this. So the talk is loosely based on the book about the metropolitan area. So I'm going to talk about the metropolitan area and then do my best to focus just on Montgomery County because that story is a little bit different and quite unique. So the DC Latino community history is relatively unknown. The community is often perceived as homogeneous with a shallow history reaching back only into the 1980s, when in fact this history can go back almost 200 years. So there are some examples of Latinos early on in DC history. One is US Naval Officer David Farragut of Spanish descent, and civil engineer Aniceto Garcia Menosal, who was a Cuban, who eventually worked for the US Navy. So through time, numerous waves of immigrants from Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Iberian Peninsula have come to DC. And so this immigrant story that I'll be talking about today has really resulted in a pan-ethnic community. There are a lot of different ethnicities in these communities. Okay. So before continuing, I want to address the use of the terms Latino, Hispanic. I am going to be using them interchangeably today, And I use these terms to refer to people whose ancestry and cultural ties are to Latin America and the Iberian Peninsula. Latino reflects shared language, religion, values, connections to Latin America and the Iberian Peninsula, immigrant narratives, the experience of navigating the US's racial and ethnic structures. But I also want to point out that there is a lot of diversity within this. One thing to also keep in mind is the terms Hispanic and Latino are relatively recent. These terms are relatively recent, but a lot of people prefer to identify themselves in other ways, either by nationality or other categories of identity. And as other scholars have pointed out, that term lacks that specificity of terms like Italian American or Irish American. Okay? More recently, many scholars and others have been using the term Latinx, which you see up here with an X at the end. And this is a category that people use to avoid favoring any gender biases. Okay. But I'm just going to use Hispanic and Latino. And of course, Latino with the ampersand is both the O and the A, if you haven't seen that before. So there's an obvious connection between Montgomery County and Washington, D.C. as people work, play, and forge connections throughout the metropolitan area. For some historical context, I'll start with the broader geographical boundaries of the D.C. metropolitan area. So as local scholars, Mark Lopez and Daniel Doctorman have shown, the Latino community in the D.C. area is quite unique. It's the 12th largest in the nation. It has the highest percentage of foreign-born, 55% are foreign-born. It has the largest Bolivian community in the US, and I'm really happy to say the highest number of Latino college graduates, and also one of the highest standards of living for Latinos in the US. If we break this down by nationality within the metropolitan area, these are census data from 2013. The numbers are higher than are shown here, but just so you get an idea of the different nationalities that comprise this community, Salvadoran, Mexican, Guatemalan, those from Puerto Rico, Peru, Bolivia, Honduras, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Cuba, Nicaragua, Spaniards, and then Argentinians. The Latinos throughout the area are relatively dispersed. But the counties with the highest percentages of Latino residents are Montgomery County and Prince William County. And you can see here Hispanic being the yellow dots. You can get an idea. And I'll show you another map just of Montgomery County, and you can see where the residents who consider themselves Latino live. So Montgomery County has the second largest Latino population in the DC area. And Fairfax has the greatest number. And I'll come back to Montgomery County in a little bit. So that you get an idea of the trends in immigration throughout the area, I'll start talking about the 1800s when we had the legations from Latin America coming to DC. These later became the embassies. The 1930s and 1940s, we had American citizens from Puerto Rico and Mexican Americans coming to the DC area. 1950s, 1960s, we have people from Cuba and the Dominican Republic. 60s and 70s, we had many South Americans coming. And then in the 1980s, we have the Central Americans. So here is David Farragut, and you probably recognize Farragut Square. His father was Jorge Farragut of Menorca, Spain, and David Farragut had an important role in the American Civil War, and his father came to the Americas and fought against the British in the Revolutionary War. Symbolic of the early relationships the U.S. had with Latin American countries are many of the statues in plazas throughout the city. Here in front of the Watergate building is the statue of the late 19th century five-term president of Mexico, Benito Juarez. So the diplomats and professionals working in the legations, embassies, and other institutions brought staff and domestic workers to DC. While some of these folks moved on to other posts, others stayed and set the stage for arrival of many others in the following century. So as the Latin American countries were gaining independence, they would set up legations and embassies here, and we had people coming both to work in the embassies, but they also brought their staff as well. So these are some of the older pictures from the Library of Congress, the Cuban legation, the children of the Chilean ambassador, and the Paraguayan ambassador. So this is back in the 1920s. These are children of the Mexican ambassador. This is a picture from 1939 when children of the diplomatic families were performing Merry Christmas for a broadcast, and this was to go out to all the children of the world. And you can see, hopefully you can see, but the children are dressed in the attire from their different countries. This is another picture from the Library of Congress. In 1940, President Roosevelt addressed the Pan American Union, which later became the OAS, or the Organization of American States. And he addressed these leaders to call for unity among the republics of the Americas in maintaining peace. So these earlier residents set the stage for later ones, and as more and more people came, they created the demand for Latino businesses and services, the arts, and social services that would serve the Latino community. And one of the earliest Hispanic stores was Casa Peña on 17th Street. It's no longer there, but that's where people would go to get the products that they wanted. We also had El Pregonero, which began in 1977 to offer a means of communication to the growing Hispanic population, informing the community in its own language and providing guidance in its efforts to adjust to a new society. So this is a 1957 New Year's celebration in Bethesda, Maryland. These folks are members of the Spanish community who worked at the Organization of American States, American University, George Washington University. The Spaniards in this picture came to the U.S. only after living in various Caribbean and Latin American countries, including Mexico, where they were given exile after the Spanish Civil War. And most of these folks ended up settling in Montgomery County. And actually, my mother and grandparents are in this picture, so that you know my bias. So these are really very early arrivals here in the 1950s. Here's another family that arrives in the 1950s. On the left, you see Claudia, in the middle, Luis, and on the far right, Asuncion. Claudia came from Peru, and Asuncion came from Spain, and they both came to work for embassy families. Later on, Claudia's son, Luis, came. So this is, the two women came in the 1940s, and then Claudia's son, Luis, came in the 1950s. And it's interesting to me that here, in Meridian Hill Park is Luis, and he's originally from Huayopampa in the province of Canta in Peru. And he came to DC to be with his mother, and he worked in a sandwich shop, and then he joined the Army. After the Army, he married a Marylander, and he settled in Silver Spring. What I found interesting about his story is that when he was in the Army in the 1950s, he was just classified as Caucasian. I'm just bringing this up as an example, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but it is an example of how Hispanic, Latin, and other identities are often obscured by government policies and labels. And in fact, the term Hispanic was first only used in 1970 census, and only in 5% of those given out. So oral histories and photographic records become really valuable for telling the stories of early Hispanic arrivals, just for this reason. So I've been collecting stories and photographs of the early arrivals to the county, hopefully the following slides will show some of the diversity of the immigrants who arrived in the 1960s and 1970s. This is Luis Navarro with his son at the memorial in DC. You can see here's our county, and here is a map of the Hispanic population from 2010. The darker areas are where these residents are concentrated. So if you go back, you can see Silver Spring, Wheaton, Rockville, Gaithersburg, and Germantown. So the story of Latinos in Montgomery County is partially obscured by the US Census data, which has really been categorized in a dichotomous way, black or white. And Latinos can be categorized either way or even in a completely separate category that reflects their origin and ancestry. So as I was looking at the census data just for Montgomery County, I was surprised by the 1960 data that showed that there were 948 speakers. That's only 0.3% of Montgomery County. In 1970, that jumps to 15,920. 1980, 22,790. It's up to 4%. By the 1990s, it's 55,000, more than 55,000, more than 100,000, 2,000, and more than 165,000 by the time the 2010 census comes around. Before the war, a lot of women came up from Central America, specifically El Salvador, to work in the embassies. And so when the war started, they brought the rest of their family. So it started this process of chain migration that occurs in the 1980s.
What war are you talking about?
The Civil War in El Salvador. Yeah. So here's just some interesting information from the census. The 1960s, people who were not native, as they called it, were of foreign stock, and they did record their mother tongue. The top countries of origin in the 1960 census for the county was the USSR, Ireland, and Germany. And there were 948 Spanish speakers, about half from Mexico. By the time it's 1970, they're recording people who have come from Cuba, which makes sense given the history of Cuba in the 60s. Most of these folks worked in professional occupations, none worked in construction, and the largest group of women worked in clerical jobs. And then in 1980, the US Census has the first questionnaire that asked people whether they're Spanish, Hispanic, Latino origin, of Latino origin or descent. And you can see that they're then recording whether people are from Mexico, Cuba, or other Spanish. I conducted an interview with Maria Walsh, who was originally from Mexico City, and she married a man who was a professor at Georgetown University. And in our conversation, she was talking about what it was like to live in Montgomery County in the 1960s. And so I'll just read what she said. It's a short quote. She said, Montgomery County was a neighborhood that was not integrated at all. She called the county a neighborhood. There is a community here, very close. It was like a sector of African Americans, and you were getting there because the pavement stopped. There was no pavement in that neighborhood. It was a community of African Americans that didn't have any connection. It was amazing how the two communities, and she's referring to Lightonsville in Silver Spring. She said it was amazing how the two communities didn't have any connection at all, no relation. Nobody was talking about fair housing or anything like that. There was complete separation. This neighborhood was Italians, Jews, people from other countries, and she's referring to her own neighborhood. And then she says there's a few Mexicans, and there were Mexicans, but they were mainly in the district, not in the suburbs. So in the 1950s and 60s, many of the Latinos are living in the city, not in the suburbs, but there are locales in the suburbs where Latinos and Hispanics would come together. And here is just one of those places. This is the Academy of American Franciscan History Chapel in Potomac, Maryland. It's no longer there, but they did have Spanish language services there in the 1960s. And I find that even more interesting. The architect for this chapel was from Peru, and the interior was also designed all with Peruvian artifacts. Has anyone ever seen this or been there?
Where is it? Or was it?
Along River Road in Potomac. Yeah, I'm sure it looks completely different now.
Is the structure still standing?
You know, that's one thing I have to go find out. I don't know.
You say, and it's on Potomac?
It's off of River Road.
River Road.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's one of my research projects to go find out what happened to it. And here is a First Communion. This is Padre Lino, the priest, and he's from Galicia, Spain. And this is the First Communion of a Spaniard in Montgomery County. During the early period, the 1960s, you also have families immigrating from South America. This is a family from Asunción in Paraguay who came here in 1968. They came here because Gustavo Gatti, the father, was offered a job as a lawyer at the Inter-American Development Bank. And while they were here, things worsened in Paraguay, so they did not return. That was because of a dictatorship, so they ended up staying. And I love this picture. I have a lot of pictures of families in the snow when I would go ask people for pictures that they had in their albums. Usually, one of the first ones to pop up was the snow picture. So here's another snow picture. So this is Juana Gonzalez, and she came from Cantón La Estancia, Cacopera in El Salvador in 1978. There were very few opportunities for her in El Salvador. She was from a relatively humble household. So she came to DC looking for work, and she ended up working as a housekeeper for a diplomatic family. And her childhood dream was to become a businesswoman, which she did. And now she's a successful owner of a restaurant and food truck business, Juanitas in Rockville. But she does highlight this broader pattern in migration, and that is of the women coming from Central America to the DC area to work as domestics, and then staying and bringing the rest of the families after the Civil War starts to get really bad. And there's a book by Terry Repack who addresses just this issue. It was written in 1995, and it's called Waiting on Washington, Central American Workers in the Nation's Capital. So today, about half of the Washington Metro DC area Hispanics are from, or trace their ancestry to Central America. And so really, compared to the rest of the nation, our communities demographically and culturally really unique. The Latinos share language, religions, and connections to Latin America and the Iberian Peninsula. One of the things that has brought the community, I think, together is this diversity. So being more alike than different than the surrounding local community. And I've heard a lot of stories of people coming here, and notable in all of the stories are the struggles with obtaining good work and learning English. The Hispanic community overall is more educated than other parts of the world. And we do have a really diverse workforce, too, in the Hispanic community. In business, the area has seen the establishment of Hispanic-owned currency exchanges, shipping services, grocery stores, ethnic restaurants. And in Montgomery County alone, in the U.S. Census, there were 11,547 Latino-owned firms, and that's in 2007, so a lot. The response of the county, Montgomery County, to this need for learning English was swift and comprehensive, and it still continues today. Montgomery County became one of the first school districts in the metro area to offer programs for English speakers of other languages, or ESOL. The county also developed other programs to support the growing immigrant community. So beginning in the late 1960s, English language programs were initiated, As the number of students increased in the 1980s during the height of the Civil War in El Salvador and also other Latin American or Central American countries, these programs were expanded to bring in bilingual staff, including teachers, psychologists, parent specialists, counselors, educational assessment specialists, as well as clerical and support staff. And so this is something that's still going strong today. So if you look at the number of ESOL students in 1967, you can see that it's only 246. And there were not as many ESOL teachers as we have today. In fall 2014, there were 23,101 students, and 68% of those were Spanish speakers. And I believe the number has increased in the last 3 years. This is just an image of some of the Montgomery County Public School educators. Teresa Wright is here, the second from the left, and she's also sitting here in the audience. And here they are, have gathered for Hispanic Heritage Day, and this is in the mid-1990s. So as the Latino community continued to increase in size, local leaders emerged to provide representation. Of course, Ana Sol Gutierrez on the left, originally from El Salvador. She began her political career in the 1990s. And Council Member Nancy Navarro, who's also here in the audience, is the council member for District 4, which includes Wheaton, Olney, and Laytonsville. So this is all really good news. So there are relatively few barrios or neighborhoods that are distinctly Latino. And so the residents are pretty dispersed throughout the county. So there still is a sense of place or belonging, however, among the Latino community. And so what I'd like to talk a little bit about here is this sense of place and belonging that is untethered to place. It's often temporary and fluid. I don't want to get too in-depth into the definition, but just so you know what I'm talking about in terms of the differences of location, locale, and sense of place. The location is just a site in space, so like the geographic coordinates on a map. Could be Montgomery County, Gaithersburg, or Germantown. A locale, however, is a setting where social life happens, where values, attitudes, and behaviors are structured and passed on. And we see this in houses and workplaces and businesses, shopping malls, churches, and in museums. And then, of course, we have a sense of place, which is this identification with and feeling of belonging. Place can have multiple meanings for different people, and people can feel a sense of belonging to different places. But I think it's really very important for people to feel a sense of belonging. So locations, Gaithersburg, Montgomery Village, Wheaton. Locales, these settings where social life happens and values are passed on, include those places like churches. And this is St. Martin's in Gaithersburg. And St. Martin's has a very interesting history with regard to the Latino community. In the 1970s, it was predominantly Anglo, and all services were conducted in English. And as the community grew, the members of the church who were Spanish-speaking fought to get the Spanish masses. Children early on celebrated Easter of the Hispanic group with piñatas, which at that time were hard to get. You had to go to a special store or make them yourself. Today, the church has an equal number of services in Spanish as in English, and celebrates lots of different saint days from Latin America. And in an interview I had with Teresa Wright, who was originally from Mexico City, she told me about when her family first moved to Montgomery Village, and she went to the local school, and the principal of the school asked the Parent-Teacher Association if anybody spoke Spanish, and only 2 people did. And so that was really the beginnings of what today is a very important community bonding and really helping the rest of the community. So in Montgomery Village at this time, there were only 5 speaking Spanish families. So these families quickly became friends and really were the seeds of this pan-ethnic community. So you have all of these families were from different countries. So you have really, truly a pan-ethnic group. And when we were talking about this, Teresa said, oh, everybody brought their own saint. So this is also reflected in the church. And you can also see this in the Mormon church as well. If you look back at the history of the local Mormon churches, the expansion of their Spanish language services. So there's Father Brooks, yes. So just down from St. Martin's is another example of the fluid nature of place. This is the story of what was once an Anglo market, this center market in downtown Gaithersburg. I'm sure you all know this place. So, but while the address and location stayed the same, the owner and the products sold there changed in 2001 when the center market became the Center Market Morazan. The owner, Neftali Granados, grew up in Morazan, and he made his way to DC after being a merchant marine, and realizing that there were no opportunities in El Salvador, and then faced with the Civil War, ended up coming here and starting a successful store. Actually, he has 3 stores. Here he is with his daughter. It's a more recent image. So other place where social life happens and cultural values are passed on are in family homes. In addition to lots of pictures of people in snow here in the area, I have lots of pictures of people wearing dresses in their front yards. When I was talking to Marty Dominguez, who is Paraguayan in this picture, I was talking to her about a sense of belonging. And she said to me, she said, being with family and friends matters more than where you are. She underscores that this sense of belonging, oftentimes it's connected to who is there, not necessarily where you are. So this is Carolina, right? Posing in her Spanish dress, and Elizabeth Betsy Wright in a dress from Tehuantepec and from Mexico, right? So we know that Teresa Wright is from Mexico. Both girls were born in the United States, but their mother was born in Mexico, and they were raised in a bilingual household, and they were living in Montgomery Village at a time when there really weren't that many, as I said before, Spanish-speaking families. And this is 1971, and I love these images because here you have, this beautiful dress from Tehuantepec and just the classic suburbia, right? This is early Montgomery Village in the background.
No trees.
Yeah, no trees. Here is another image. This is an image that Linda Robinson gave to me. She's one of the co-authors of the book Latinos in the Metropolitan DC area. And here she is. She is Puerto Rican. And her friend here who is helping her with the piñata is the child of Mexican immigrants. So in all of these pictures, you can see that you have people from different nationalities, different ethnic groups. This is Juana Gonzalez once again, and I include this picture just to show that she was successful with her business after coming here in the 1970s to work as a domestic. I asked her for pictures, and she was really proud of her car and her 2 food trucks. The food trucks are great because they bring the Salvadoran food to the construction sites and other places where people are working. So it's nice to feel connected in that way, particularly with food. If you think about a sense of belonging, food is really important in that. So I'm going to expand a little bit and talk briefly about metropolitan DC area and this sense of place. And just reiterate that identification with a place through a feeling of belonging, either consciously or through everyday behaviors, is what I'm talking about with sense of place. It can overlap with locations and locales. And it does provide a framework to address the kind of fluid and dynamic nature of Latinidad in our community. This is an image that was taken downtown. You can see the DC 101 sign up there, if you remember. This is Connecticut Avenue. But here you have a procession on Good Friday. You see this procession moving down Connecticut Avenue. You see the shared beliefs and expressions of religion. They're very public and highly visible. But after this day is over, the street will go back to looking normal. And so here is where this temporary sense of belonging comes into play. And of course, really one of the most visible expressions of community and sense of belonging is the Hispanic or Latino Festival. And I love this quote from Olivia Caraval. She is at the Smithsonian's Center for Folklife Studies. She was originally from Mexico, and then she moved to Chicago, and then she came to DC. And when the Hispanic Festival first started in DC, it was not on the mall. It was just in the streets. It was in the streets of Columbia and 18th. And so she wrote about this, and this is her quote. She says that the sense of solidarity among the mostly Latino crowd surprised and attracted me. I experienced an ambiente, which means a cultural ambiance, that was markedly different from the everyday American lifestyle to which I had become accustomed. The food, the dancing, the language, the expressive gestures, the tones, the voice evoked a memory of home and longing for community for the first time since I had come to this country. And keep in mind, she had lived in Chicago before, which has a really large Mexican community. So after the festival's over, the sense of place that she felt kind of disappears, but it does become a memory. So the DC Hispanic Festival has been going on for more than 40 years. But more recently, Latinos have moved to the suburbs and other nearby cities and have constructed more Latino festivals. Baltimore has been celebrating a Latino festival for about 35 years now, and the city of Frederick for about 11 years. Frederick County has seen a marked increase in. And Montgomery County, I'm sorry?
Is there one in Montgomery County?
In Montgomery County, there is the Multicultural Festival, and I'll show you an image in a minute of the one constructed by the Salvadoran community. Here's just another picture of what it used to look like downtown in Adams Morgan. Bless you. And then, of course, you have the festival that's been going on on the Gaithersburg Fairgrounds. It's the Festival Salvadoreñísimo, which is hard to say. But here, folks have come together in a temporary way to celebrate El Salvador. And then, of course, another way that people have constructed a sense of place is through sport, particularly soccer or football. Marie Price and Courtney Whitworth have written about this, and they said that, well, they point out that soccer carves out an ephemeral space in the DC suburbs for Latinos who meet to play and socialize, speaking their native languages and constructing memories of homelands. When the soccer games are over, the sense of place constructed on the playing field disappears, and participants diverse to their homes. In 1998, there were 450 Latino soccer teams in the metropolitan area. So it was in that year that the Washington Post wrote about these soccer teams and said the soccer spectacle has become the most visible manifestation of the Latino community at play. A sporting pageant staged every weekend on all the green space local governments can provide. And this is just one of the teams, Somos Peru. Another way that temporary sense of belonging in place is constructed is through protests and marches. In the book, we've put in pictures from the 1980s and 1990s, and you can see some of the ones that are staged in DC, which is really a national, international stage. I just included one for today. This is in 1938. 3,000 Spanish-born women came to protest to revoke the arms embargo against the democratically elected government of Spain. So I'd like to conclude by saying that this sense of place is not necessarily anchored to a particular location. It's a concept that can be used in the study of immigration and migrants as they construct places that are meaningful to them. This is an image from Olivia Cadaval as well. You can see the Maryland license plates, but then it's covered with all things Mexico. And this is my final slide. And this is a slide of a Paraguayan dance troupe in Montgomery County. This is from the 1970s. So the social process of constructing place, whether permanent or temporary, can validate one's life as significant and meaningful to others. Thank you.